All right.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So we welcome. I know there's been quite a bit of activity in the last couple of weeks. I'm glad that you had a chance, many of you, to meet your facilitators through the video that we posted, and we just had another introduction session before this session where we met another 10, 12 participants in the program. So if you have not been able to introduce yourself, and are on this part of the call, what I would suggest is let's pick up and perhaps do another introduction at the end after this call for those who for whom it is possible, so that we have the full time of this hour and a half together in order to kind of get more into what it is that we're actually going to do in this course. So there is, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, when you move your cursor to it, you see that there's an option to chat. If you can make sure at the chat window, if you want to let us know if you intend to be on the introduction call, where you will make an introduction to the group so that we can post on the website and everyone can see. If you'd like to do that at the end of this session, please write something in the chat window and we can keep track. Okay, and please keep your video off during your video and mics off until we get to the question and answer section at the end of this presentation. So very happy to be starting now. So to start with, we want to talk. Thomas and I want to speak about the course as a whole, what it is that we're trying to do together. And I think from what everyone has said in their introductions, I think the kind of interest and concern about what's happening in the world and a desire to find a new way for human beings to come together and discover something new between us is what a lot of people have expressed as their desire in joining the course, and that's certainly what our focus is going to be. Thomas and I have spent the last 20 years working and discovering how to create emergence in groups. How can we create spaces in which human beings can come together and learn and create at a collective level? And that means not simply as individuals with a great deal of creativity and insight, participating and each chipping in their own ideas and interests and knowledge, but a collective in which the creative possibility of being together and being human becomes alive, and that we can build something together in that way.
In fact, this is something we will talk about quite a lot, also I think in all the next 6 months. And it's quite a subtle point and a very fundamental point, at least how we see the dialogue work. And just to try to illustrate it a little bit, as we are on this call, usually the perspective that we have is a perspective that we come from a certain place. We sitting in Frankfurt, you sitting at your place, wherever you are on the globe. We are experiencing our collective space, but usually what we experiencing in this collective space is our individual perspective on this collective space. So there's a certain identity, which is our kind of usually day-to-day identity, and we are seeing the screen, or if we are in a group in a room, we are seeing each other directly. But the lenses we are looking through are the lenses of looking from my individual point of view, being together in wherever we are, which is a valid point of view. But there's something different that allows a kind of a collective emergence, that allows a different way of interacting between us that is very central to the dialogue work that we're doing. And maybe just as something as like an exercise, although we are sitting literally around the globe, just if you go into your own experience and imagine that because we are linked together by technology, and we can hear each other. Right now you can hear us, but we in the course of this course we will hear each other a lot, as we, particularly in the smaller groups, there's a kind of consciousness space between us that has something like a field quality, which is different than me hearing you. There's something in this, what we call intersubjective space, that has its own way of perception, and that is different than the individual point of view. And we will talk a lot about it because it's a very subtle thing, and it's very easy to miss, but it allows to be aware that all communication spaces, all dialogue spaces have their own gestalt as a whole. And it's also related to the very simple insight that the whole is always more than the sum of the parts. We all are part of this conversation here right now, but the whole conversation is not just the sum of the parts that we are, it's a whole. And to really lean into the understanding and the perception that this whole, this conversation as a whole has its own gestalt, allows to see the potential of this dialogue, the potential of this conversation, to see it from a different lens. That's a short introduction of what this key feature of our dialogue book is about, but it is very central to what we try to do.
And don't worry, it's like, well, I'm not sure I get it right now, because that's what we have these months together in order to develop. But another way of, I think we asked and suggested a small exercise about just walking on the face of the earth. That when you shift from a perspective in which, you know, here I am and I'm late for work, or I need to meet someone and I need to catch the train, and when you're in that mode, it's a very individual, subjective experience. When you do what we asked in the exercise and think about, I'm a human walking on Earth, the planet, there is something that opens up that is not simply an individual subjective experience. There's an opening, and in some ways, what we're talking about is bringing that kind of opening, that kind of appreciation of a whole that you're a part of, into a group dialogue, a group conversation, and so what we're looking for in terms of emergence is the emergence of a deepening and creative capacity between each of us, or between us as a group. So it's intersubjective, and it's a word that Thomas just introduced. It's between subjects. It's what happens in the middle, rather than within subject. What happens to me in terms of my insights as an individual. And I think in our work, in working this way, some of the things that you can begin to notice is that there are things that a group can hold, and a group can realize together that the individual mind and psyche can't actually hold alone. And it's that, and given the kinds of complexities that we are working with at this time in human culture, the capacity to have groups hold complexity and be able to come to new understandings from that complexity that is beyond the individual we feel is a very important capacity to develop. But again, it's the realization and the work happens at the intersubjective level, not simply at the level of my own psychological insight.
And what you just said is also one of the reasons why we think, and it's also our experience as we develop this dialogue work, why this is so helpful for also the intercultural dialogue that we try to create here together. Is a very simple reason, is that together, if we hold the togetherness of this, we can hold more complexity than every single one of us can hold. That's the very simple reason for it. Because we are dealing on all levels with such huge forms of complexity. And when we talk about global dialogue, this is complexity of complexity. And it's just that together, when we are kind of appreciating the togetherness of the complexity that we bring to this conversation, the chance to hold much higher levels of complexity is just much more likely to happen. And this is the reason why this is an important feature of our work. And I hope, and in fact, I'm very trustful that this is something that we also can experience together.
And so the action in the course actually will happen in the dialogue groups with your facilitators and with each other. That's where the real juice of the matter is. And I think that from what I can tell, it's what you're all looking forward to. That coming together with real sincerity, with a sense of urgency, because we all recognize that we're in quite some difficult situations on this planet and in our homelands and in our neighborhoods, with deep respect and real interest and curiosity, that with that foundation that we can catalyze a field between us that can know more, hold more, not just complexity of information, but also complexity of human emotion, that can bring us to something different. We're not going to be teaching the dialogue process. We're not going to be giving instruction on this is what you do and now do this, now do the other thing. We want you, with the facilitator's help, to kind of learn this by doing it. And we have guidelines and guideposts, and the facilitators will help with that, and you will get that over time. But our emphasis is going to be on doing, on engaging in dialogue, rather than being given a list of rules and you try to follow it. We want something that's much more organic than that would allow.
Yeah. If I may just add to this, because this is also part of how we feel it's much more productive to learn this together. When we really learn this from our own experience and not just from theoretical guidelines, although theoretical guidelines may be and are helpful, being focused on guidelines creates a certain kind of consciousness that is focused on kind of the abstractions of guidelines. The kind of awareness that we are holding together is something that you cannot hold in an abstract way. We only can hold when we are really looking at the actual conversation that we're having. So in that sense, it's at least how we learn it and how we think it works better is when the focus point is more on the experiential side. What does it mean that we are together in this conversation? How does it feel like? What is my experience of this? Holding also our abstract insights with this, but having the focus of the actual meeting that we are having, because that's the real life process between us. The real life process is never abstract, it's never theory, it's never a guideline. All this can help to understand, but the realness is in the actual meeting. That's why we attempt to do it this way.
And also, we're talking about engaging us in a certain kind of inquiry, and you're saying the meeting is where the real thing happens, and the kind of inquiry that we are engaging with is not an intellectual inquiry. It's not simply intellectual. Of course, we're using our minds. We're using all of our experience. But the reason why I say this is that inquiry, particularly in these days, has become a way of a kind of nihilistic way of cutting things apart or chopping things into bits or demolishing concepts. We're not interested in that kind of inquiry. We're looking for an inquiry that has life as its basis, that has our shared humanness, the potentiality of human beings coming together, and a sensitivity to what brings that into a greater sense of aliveness and depth and sensitivity, awareness, and what takes away from that. So it's this isn't a kind of intellectual I don't know, chopping up process. It's a process of becoming increasingly sensitive to the potential for aliveness that lives between us. And so, did you want to?
Yeah, one thing about the aliveness, because again, the whole course about global dialogue is because one motive why we do this is because we see dialogue as a possibility to create a sensitivity of the aliveness of our global humanity. And the aliveness of our global humanity as a consciousness field becomes accessible through real dialogue. So in real dialogue, when we really meet, even when we just meet on screen, there's something between alive, because it's a real meeting, it's not an abstract meeting. And to be aware of this aliveness is different than our intellectual insights. We need our intellectual insights to think about it, to understand it, to dissect it, whatever, but not to miss that we are on this Zoom call, for example, right now, as real human beings in a real meeting. This is a process of life, of our humanity, of all of us humans, for all of us together here. And what we really try to achieve is to create a human culture that is very much aware of this living reality between us. And if we achieve that, I think we achieve a lot.
And the content then, what are we doing in these presentations? What are we doing in this monthly work with the two of us and our guest faculty? Is that we're using, there are certain areas of content that we have been looking into and also have some experience of exploring that are points that divide us as human beings. We want to bring to the surface both kind of have us inquire more deeply into what makes us up as cultural beings, how the cultures that we're a part of have shaped us, shaped our assumptions about living, shaped our understanding of what reality is, what relationship is. We want to bring these ways in which we've been we've been conditioned to experience each other as separate or other to the fore, in order to be able to make them transparent, and or I guess to be able to own them more deeply and be more whole. At the same time, make them more transparent so that we can together be able to see through these things, held in a context of held in a context of wholeness that allows us to create something new together. I think that's the more transparent the ways that we have been separate can become between us, the more deeply we can own who we are, and the more capacity for a new space to emerge between us. That's and in that, then we begin to exercise, and I mean exercise in terms of like build strength, the potential of holding the tension between very different experiences of being human from a position of deeper commonality. But neither, we don't want to fall into either a we're all one kind of easy sort of pseudo-spiritual, just hey, we're all one, there aren't real differences. I think at this point on this planet, that kind of thinking seems to be obviously not enough, and nor are we all so different that no one can understand each other, that we are devoid of ways of communicating deeply. And so which is often where much of contemporary identity politics and political discourse go, is leaving us each kind of isolated as countries of one. And so we're looking to hold the tension from a place of unity, of our very profound differences because of cultural differences, language differences, and historical differences.
In fact, when we had our global webcast, One World Rising, we had a conversation with a friend of ours, Venkatesh, who is a social and educational activist in India, which had a big impact on both of us, because he made a very simple point from his own. Has a very Gandhian, Mahatma Gandhi background, and in his own reflection about what does it need to create a global consciousness, he said, what is very often missed or not seen is, in order to really hold the span that we need to create something like a global consciousness, we have to be very rooted in our own traditions. And he was very much talking, of course, about his Indianness and his big, deep Indian cultural background. And he was reflecting on that there's a form of globalization of consciousness happening right now, which we can call it the Facebook generation, where we think if we just basically connect globally, we create this one global consciousness by being connected via the internet, which is true in one's own hand. But there's something where we lose our roots, we lose who we are, where we come from. And from Venkatesh, this is very much his Indian culture, his Indian background. For myself, being Austrian German, this is my Central European background. And he said, we need these roots in order to be able to hold the span to really understand each other. That myself not being rooted in my Central Europeanness and a deep understanding, intellectual, spiritual understanding of what this means, and also knowing my own history. And for him, his Indian history, and it can be South American history, can be Chinese history, to really be rooted in our roots, so that we can come together in the global reality. We have to hold both sides to really achieve what we need to achieve as a global society right now.
And some of us, I think, more and more, given how mobile the human populations are living in multiple places, or have roots in a certain tradition, but are growing up or have grown up in other places, and really open. And I know for some of you, even in the course, this is a live issue. Then what is my identity? These are big, important questions, and it having a deep rootedness in our traditions, and also in the deepest part of our humanity is an important aspect that we want to explore in this course.
Yeah, and we will talk about this more later on. But one of the challenges, but also the big chances of our situation of globalization right now, is that we grow together at dramatic speed right now. I mean, the fact that we can talk like this as we're talking here, through the internet, live, meeting each other, that's was so out of sight as a possibility just 5, 10, 20 years ago. which on one hand is a huge advantage. On the other hand, we also have to see in the last hundreds of thousands of years, our identity, our family identity, our tribal identity, our national identity, our cultural identity had also in a positive way its isolation. So it was not threatened. We were who we were, and there was a clear understanding, being German, American, Indian, Chinese, Filipino, that we had basically an environment that was protected. One of the challenges of globalizations of consciousness is that our identities are not protected anymore. We are, to the good and to the bad, in each other's faces. That is powerful and fantastic, but we have to deal with it. And part of what we try to do in this course is to find out together, because I think we are together in this finding out process, how we can achieve this so that we can deepen and broaden our humanity.
Great. Thanks. And I think maybe that's a good segue. I mean, we have, just to run through the topics of the program, the course, we're going to be speaking about prior unity, and in our next unit, which is about the ways in which we are already, that we are one. Prior unity, we're going to speak about the nation soul and how that has created who we are as individuals. We're going to talk about social identity, dialectical thinking, and the new activism that springs from creating spaces in consciousness that allow for what we don't know yet to emerge, which we hope and intend is the process that you'll be going through during the entire course. And to start with, we're going to speak about globalization, and that's our first topic. And it's our first topic because we're speaking about global realities, and the fact that we are all coming from these different vantage points on the surface of this planet, and the common narrative, as you've seen on the website, and I'm sure it's familiar to all of you, the common narrative is that globalization is something that the West has brought to the rest of the world, and that it's a narrative of domination, and in that narrative of domination, it's a narrative of domination and in some ways possibility. And depending on your point of view in relationship to it, and in that narrative, there are divisions created and cut between people, between North and South, East and West. The creation of the idea of the third world is something that was created only in the last 50 years. But the idea that you would rank parts of the world in relation to each other, while there is a certain way that you could say that it made sense, but the fact that there was this ranking speaks to a kind of system of looking at each other that holds domination and subordination in place. And so we thought to start with the topic of globalization because it is the context that we're dealing with, and to begin to look at it in a bigger way, what we're calling a cosmoscentric way, is one way to start to unlock some of the fixed positions, either of the dominants or the subordinates in the historical way of viewing this, from being in this narrative in a certain way, or reacting against things that have happened in a way that doesn't allow for a greater creativity.
And maybe also to kind of counteract our usual thinking about globalization. I'm sure many of you watched our video on deep history, and from a deep history point of view, globalization is much longer process than the globalization of the last 200 or 500 years. Basically, our human development is a process of globalization, because we have to deal with the fact that we are all coming out of Africa, and we globalized. From Africa, we went northeast. We came to Asia. We came to Australia. We came to Europe, and we came to the Americas, and we came also to the Pacific. This process of human culture is a process of globalization. At the same time, the human cultures created their own niches, because this globalization was not connected for a long time. And a way how to understand, or how we usually understand, is that we are reconnecting our joint human story as we are finding our connections, first through trade and then also through politics, and now also through technology and cultural exchange, that this global human body that we are more and more finds ways to not only exist in the different niches that we have created in our cultural spaces, but also realizes that these niches are part of one human development that we created in the last something like 100,000 years.
Yeah. So to kind of move from that to cosmocentric, what you're saying is that a kind of a cosmocentric view is, in some ways, you could say, kind of, if you stand outside the planet, it's sort of the view of the astronauts, which has been so transformative for them, and is also, I think, touches each of us when we see pictures of the planet or the Earth rising from the moon. That there's something that is touched in each of us when we see that. That's not enough to get us to realize that we're one on this fragile globe that's floating in space. But it's kind of off world, I'm saying, because we're trying to take in and begin to have as a felt sense a whole that is bigger than nation, that is bigger than continent, but a whole that is round, that is whole.
Yeah. Which kind of also describes the use of the word cosmocentric, because somehow it can sound strange. What do we mean with the cosmocentric perspective? But it simply means that we see this whole, meaning the globe, not just from the inside, which is a global-centric view, where we see the world from the inside of our Earth,
or on the surface, I guess.
On the surface, or however you want it. But you step out, as the astronauts and cosmonauts did, looking for the first time from the outside. And so, wait a moment, this globe is just a part of a bigger thing. And this bigger thing is a galaxy, is a cosmos. And that changes our perspective of our human story dramatically when we start to not just see it from the inside of our global reality, but from the outside, and see what this global reality is part of a bigger thing. And it creates a whole that you can see from the outside, because this Earth developed in a huge cosmic development. And of course, this is too much to go into right now, but just to make this shift. And historically, it's also just true that the fact that we, for the first time in the 60s, we had photos from the globe, from the outside, really did something to human consciousness.
And what made this possible, actually, I think. But it's not only a kind of whole view, but it is, as Thomas was saying, it helps us to have a longer range view on who we are and the globalizing process. And I want to pick up a term that you used. You said something about humans being in different niches. I mean, what species, as evolutionary biology tells us, species develop within certain ecological niches that they adapt to the environment. The thing that's remarkable and is so remarkable about humans is that we have the capacity to adapt niches to us, or there's a more creative relationship, and we have had the capacity to go across this entire entire globe and inhabit it. And we've been doing that for the last 50,000 years, and that is, so we're inherently a globalizing species, and that what has happened over time is that we have become increasingly dense on the surface of this planet. That in the process of small simultaneous groups of hominids and humans, early humans, and living on the face of this earth, located mostly in Africa and Mesopotamia, and then moving slowly in smaller groups around this the planet. We are now thick with humans. The surface of the planet is fairly densely populated, and that in itself is a huge shift, and it's created dynamics that have, as we were saying, put us up close to each other and in conflict, more and more conflict with each other. I mean, it's the density of humans in certain spaces that have pushed human beings to have to create increasingly abstract systems of culture. So that moving from smaller units of humans living together to more densely populated groups of human beings living together in larger spaces, humans have gone from face-to-face cultures where everyone you dealt with was someone that was was not far from you, and that you knew who was in your life, who had responsibilities in your life, who you needed to be friends with or in relation to systems that become increasingly abstract, and where the people that have control over your life become more and more distant from you.
And it's interesting enough that these developments and leaps of human development of human culture that we did in different places on this globe independently, but in a similar way, because we all started in tribal contexts. We all started in what you called this face-to-face, where basically all our relationships were family relationships that could kin relationship that could be held in a direct dialogical context. But with the birth of agricultural and more dense and more populated and bigger societies, state, government, abstract rule, development of money, trade, all this developed as a response to deal with this huger context, huger systems, more density. And we did this in different ways, but also in comparable ways in most of the places of the globe. And to see this is part of our human endeavor, and then also to look at it, how we did it in one way similar, in one way also different, because you also can see the different human cultures developing different niches and responding in different ways to the niches and different, creating diverse forms of human culture that have their own strengths and weaknesses that we will discuss later on also, where you see the different places of this globe created their own special form of humanness, and that developed in a very isolated way for thousands of years. And this is something that also comes face to face right now as we are coming in this globalized situation.
But to stay with this began to be more face to face. I think one of the reasons that we were interested in Arif Dierlich's work, which is very difficult to read. It's very, heavy duty academic history, which is not something that I can easily manage. But one of the things that he points to is, he says that we call modernity this the part of globalization that the Europeans and Americans have for the last couple of 100 years have dominated. But that if you look as a historian back, and you see that this globalizing process, and what you could say is very early modernity, in the 1400s, you can see that the great civilizations of China, of India, were in a very lively and engaged cultural and economic and intellectual trade. That there was a lot of communication. There was a kind of a globalizing, and also Africa, and that there was a real pattern of exchange, engagement, of a kind of more pluralistic context and sharing that was in place, and that ended up being exploited by the British, the Dutch, because they, in wanting the goods that these very sophisticated cultures could produce, were able to go in, be able to see it from a different perspective, and be able to create competition and systems by which they were able to get control of a lot of these industries, particularly in India. I'd say India more than China. I think China for different reasons ended up being more into itself and outside of the reach of Europe. But Africa, India, that there was something happening there that is a globalizing process. That was moving, and that was an incredible engagement before the Europeans came in to take over and exploit these other cultures.
In fact, the Europeans came second into the game, and some researchers make the argument, and we can make the argument, that both globalization and modernity in its early forms was earlier developed in the Indian and East African space, where there was a lot of trade going on, and there was a lot of intercultural development already happening before first the Portuguese, then the Spanish, then the Dutch and the English came in. So there was something like a forming of an early modernity and early globalization that was non-European. But as you just described, and we could discuss the reason for this European overtake, was taken over by a European form of globalization. And what we experience in the last 500 years is this European form of the process of globalization and modernization that we're in right now, that it so dramatically speeded up in the last 500 years. But to see it is a European form, but the process itself is bigger and more diverse than its European version of it. And we have to look at both sides, that globalization is a deeply human process, and we look in the very particular form that has a European American form right now, and has a particular dominant character that is the form of colonization in the way it happened. We can discuss if it could have happened in a different way, but to see this is the form how we experienced globalization, and this is the cultural reality of our globality right now. And if we want to move beyond it, we really have to understand that modernization, globalization, and colonization is not necessarily the same thing.
Mm. Yeah, and this to acknowledge and that the very brutal process of colonization that was made that is what Euro or Western centric globalization or modernization modernity was about, that the power of a newfound rationality, what in the West, the Western Enlightenment, that the rationality of that was developed in the West, that was a cutting away from a kind of embeddedness, an embeddedness in nature, an embeddedness in deeper forms of communal relationship, that created a capacity for a mechanistic rationality in the West that made these kinds of systems of control and technical innovation possible, was the driving force behind this Euro-American globalizing modernity.
And in fact, it's very deeply embedded in European history, because if you look into European history and compare it with Indian or Chinese or other histories, there's something that happened in the classical European Greek culture that has specific orientation on individuation and rationalization. And the first form of, you could say, aggressive globalization was Alexander the Great.
Mm.
And Alexander the Great was very deeply in the European cosmological view of Greek philosophy, and which is exactly oriented around the individuation and rationalization process. And the Greek culture and the Roman Empire and the whole European history have these specifics that laid the foundation also of the colonization later on, 500 years later, with the Spanish, Portuguese forms of colonization. But to see there's something specific that comes from Europe that, to the good and the bad, is very much related to the specific form of European culture.
Mm. But I mean, they're the kind of trauma, national trauma, that Western colonization has brought, is something that obviously is still playing out in dynamics on this planet. It's for some reason the Paris Accord kind of comes to mind. It's an extraordinary thing that the most powerful economies on this planet have come to an agreement in Paris, and yet what Malhotra calls the asymmetrical position that different cultures are in relation to climate change and their own economic growth and so forth is I find very painful, and yet to support the fact that an agreement has been made, and that has not happened before. So we're coming right now because of technology, because of colonization. We have been brought closer and closer together, which is something we've been saying repeatedly during this last hour. And in this closer and closer, there is it's calling for a new demand for integration. And there are, from different contexts, there are different ways in which integration is being looked for. Either integrate, you all come into my way of seeing things, which is not exactly integration, but the conflict between peoples, between worldviews, between systems is particularly intense right now, in a way and with technological power of destruction that is unlike we've ever seen before. So the situation that we're in now, where we're in a legally or politically post-colonial context, dominated by a neoliberal agenda coming from particularly the Western powers. And what does that mean? That means a desire to have the entire world function in one economic system that places capitalism and freedom of access to markets as the unifying priority of all peoples. And that is and in that, therefore, it opens up one's value is found through commodifying, making commodities out of human experience and out of things, but turning in some ways human relationship, human experience into a thing, that can be valued and exploited in the market. So there's a lot of pressure to have things work as a whole, and yet there isn't what is emerging at the same time is this systematizing of the globe that is probably one of the more toxic forms of the extension of modernity that we've had so far. I mean, colonization has been horrific on this planet, and this is a different form, to my mind, of colonization.
I mean, what you're expanding on is also a differentiation of system roles and the reality of life. What we're talking about before, when we were trying to describe the dialogue process, is also to really emphasize that life, understood in a direct way, you cannot understand it as a system. You have to be in it as a real life world. System worlds are abstract worlds. And one philosopher that we use for our understanding of the process of globalization and modernization, Jürgen Habermas, really makes this distinction between life worlds and system worlds. And to see that the process of globalization, or the process of creating big systems, is the process of creation of abstract systems that are imposed on the reality of our human and also the natural life world, which in itself is a necessary process because it's impossible to hold and understand the totality of our globe without the capacity of abstract thinking. But as a side product of this abstract and logical thinking, we create a world reality that basically is either held together by abstract bureaucratic forms of political order and dominance, or by the economic process of commodification. Both are kind of realities that really have a system reality versus the life reality of living life experience that is created, for example, through dialogue, through understanding, through meeting each other, which you don't you cannot translate it in abstract modes. You have to participate in life. You cannot just make abstract systems out of this. So part of how globalization was created is creating these abstract systems, which is in itself necessary reality. But, and this is Jürgen Habermas' main argument, there is a process of colonization of the systems world, colonizing our life world. Can we create a different form also of a global reality that is not just dominated by these abstract systems of commodification and bureaucratic governance, but is also co-created for our living reality as humans, understanding and being in dialogue with each other? Is this possible? And how? So what can we do to do this? And I think a global dialogue process is one mean to really find back, to counter oppose a living reality versus the abstract reality of our global systems.
And in the difference, I would say that this systems kind of colonization that is happening now is the kind of edge of it's an edge of globalization that's happening right now, that we're in the midst of, and the push that's coming, I think, up from below in all of us, that is coming from our sense of sometimes helplessness in relationship to the enormity of these forces that are systematically kind of commodifying and devaluing, that are based on values that are not the values that most of us hold most dear. That this is pushing for again a different kind of integration, which is what you were speaking about in terms of the dialogue process, a new kind of integration that has produced things like integral theory, which was which has had a number of different threads. The work of Sri Aurobindo in India, Jean Gebser in Germany and France, from Ken Wilber. He's, I think, in contemporary culture, probably Ken Wilber is the one that's most known in relationship to this way of this an attempt to come up with a new way of thinking that allows for an integration between, with Wilber, a real Eastern, the Eastern meaning India and Asia, an Eastern emphasis on the interior and on consciousness work, on our capacity for deeper and wider awareness, combined with Western rationality and capacity for self-reflection. That this kind of integral, this is another example, and or an example of an attempt to respond to the kind of flattening out, the kind of bulldozer running over difference that is that seems to be part of this the kind of globalizing capitalist neoliberal movement of not so much integration but system control. But the part of what we want to do is to bring an integral or an integrating lens through dialogue to our work. That integral, the way it's been defined by Wilber is still Western centric. And while we all have our biases, Thomas and I do, and that are rooted in our traditions or our acculturation processes, that the real place for integration has to be in living relationship. That you can't integrate simply theoretically. that for integration to have an impact on the creation of human consciousness, it has to happen not simply within the mind, but in the intersubjective space between us. And that brings us back to, in some ways, the beginning, and what it is that we were saying is the purpose of the course. Because here in this part of the program about globalization, what we're saying is that we need to begin to be able to be in relationship with each other and hold the complexity of the truth of the destructive effects of globalization, to realize how destructive a simply mechanistic rationality is, and to use the wisdom and knowledge that each culture carries to be able to create a new integrated whole. And an integrated whole doesn't mean that one part is reduced to another, but that that there is an aliveness that is brought through the integrity of each part, that allows us to begin to see what might be possible on this planet.
In some way, we try to achieve two things at the same time by doing this course. One is in the dialogue and the inquiry that we try to go through together to really create an understanding, what is this process of globalization in human history about, to really deepen our understanding from the different perspectives that are emerging right now all over the globe, and have also a critical understanding of what this is and what are the dangers, what are the downsides, or what are the shadow sides, but also what are the possibilities of this. On the other side, to create a living reality of dialogue that allows us, between the different cultures all around the globe, to create a living context of understanding that creates a force of real conversation, of real dialogue, of real connection, to be a part of this globalization. Because the new technology, as we have right now with this Zoom technology, allows us to do a very simple thing, to be together. And this sounds very simplistic, but in combination with a deep understanding of what this process of globalization is about, to create pockets and networks of real dialogue, and this course is a small attempt to do this, is something that allows to bring the living world back on a global scale. Because we, in this bigger part of our course, in the small groups, just to be together and share our understanding, but also share our living reality with each other, creates something that is not abstract thinking. It's a form of a network of living relationships that in itself can create a power of change, something that is able to influence our cultures locally and globally. And to create this living realities on a global scale is something that really can change the development of culture and consciousness on the globe.
Mm. In ways that we don't know how.
Exactly. And find out together.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we hope for.
Mm. And in that, I want to bring in another term. In that, what we're doing is transrational. That we're looking to use all the capacities that we have to be able to touch into different dimensions of ourselves and reality, and be able to hold them in relationship to each other. And that is that is a new space, and the potential of that new space, you can feel and sense that there's a potential to this new space, but how that will be is our exploration together. What that will be is our exploration together.
And one way to understand what transrational could be is to find higher forms of intuition. Because living realities live through our intuitions. And our capacity for rationality is something that allows us to go beyond our primary intuitions and hold something like abstract context and abstract realities. And this, as we tried to discuss before, is something that allowed us to live on a much bigger scale on this globe, and to hold this systems also with our intellectual understanding, our rational understanding, is part of what the human evolution is about. But real life, in the end, happens where intuition happens. Is it possible to hold the intuition that is capable to hold the rationality within it? It's an intuition that is not before rationality, but it's including rationality. That's what the term transrational tries to attempt to say. Is it possible that we really also highly intellectual developed people who really have an abstract understanding of what this world is about, but meet in something that is not just held by the mechanic thinking, but by something that again comes together in a higher intuition? I think that's again what a living reality in a global scale needs to create in order to create living realities on this world.
But to take that that you've just said so clearly, and to use that little example again of being human on the face of this earth, that from what you were just saying, the capacity to kind of go, oh, human on the face of this earth is actually an intellectual capacity, or it requires a way of thinking or a system of thinking that allows us that is very abstract, and yet it's in that abstraction that we can come home to a very different experience of being human here, that is more holistic, that is not, and that's not an intellectual idea. That is a felt sense. Would you say that that's an example?
No, absolutely. Because I think it is a simple and a good example of what this is about. To understand that our understanding that we live on one Earth here and that on this one globe is something that we cannot think without abstract thinking. We talked about how we only, by traveling to the moon, were able to see the Earth for the first time, and none of us has seen really the Earth. We have seen photos that other people tell us these are photos from the Earth, but wherever we walk on the Earth, we walk on this specific place where we are, and we see a horizon, and we are told that the horizon is part of a big globe. But it needs our abstract understanding and our abstract thinking to be able to, wow, this is a whole globe. But can we do this in a way where it doesn't stand in the abstraction, but we create a living relationship with this globe, with Earth? A living relationship that also holds the understanding that this Earth is populated by all life species, from the Amazons to the Himalayas, for all the nations that we know about. Can we create a living and also felt relationship to the totality of this, that we also need our mind to understand what it is? That's using our rational analytical mind, but it's going beyond it and creating a higher intuition. Oh, wait a moment, there is a space that we're living in, and it's this globe, it's this Earth, it's populated by these cultures, it's populated by this species, it is in danger, or it's in danger also by our doing with global warming. But what we need is more than our rational understanding of this. We need more, and this more you can call higher intuition, you can call also trans-rational understanding of our global situation.
Great, good. Okay, I think now what we would like to do is, I think if you have a question, why don't you? I mean, we would like maybe, you know, you can take a few minutes. We've just been downloading a lot here, and what we're speaking about is meant to help you, give you context for the materials the range, and there's a huge range of materials that were available for this module. So what we'd like to do is to invite you, if you have a question, consider, you know, a question that you have. If you have a question, then go back on camera. Turn your video on. If you don't have a question, if you could keep your camera off, that would be that would be preferable, and then we can see and speak to whoever's asking the question.
And in case if you wonder how to turn on your camera, on Zoom on the lower left corner, you have two buttons. One is mute with your microphone, and one is stop and start video. And if you just push the button with start video, you will be back on camera.
You can take a few minutes to think, you know, what you would like to ask.
And also, if of some reason you are not able to turn on your camera, you also can send us a chat, and then we can also switch on your camera from our side.
And the chat is also something that if you move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen. Oh, somebody looks like they're trying to come in. But if you move down to the bottom of your screen, you see a little bubble that says chat, and you can write your question there. So you can also make a comment. You can also say something that clicks for you, or something that you feel fuzzy about, or you're not so sure of. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Denise. We also can unmute you. See?
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Denise. Now
Hi.
we also can hear you.
I enjoyed that a lot. That was beautiful. I think the part that I feel less certain about is the part at the end, the transrational. It's not clear to me. I mean, it's not. I certainly don't want to throw out the rational and the mind and the intellectual aspects, but I'm not sure that having them necessarily gives a higher form of intuition. I don't know that post-rational or transrational is better than pre-rational intuition when it comes to our relationship with the living world and with the earth, with the globe. Certainly helps us to deal better with colonization and globalization and political and economic realities. But I guess I'm not clear that it's in terms of intuition it's any better or different.
I think in many ways you're right, because there are areas of intuition where all this abstract thinking is just not helpful. But in terms of the complex systems that we are living in, we also have to relate to these complex systems.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And for that, the rational mind is very helpful to really understand this global system. But how can we do this without losing our intuition? Because that's part of, I would say, and we can talk about this, of the downsides of the European culture, that we developed a highly abstract form of relating to the world that is kind of a mechanistic rationality. This is highly developed, but completely, it's maybe too much to say, but let's put it this way, lost our intuitive sense of being alive and being with each other.
And being with nature.
Yes.
Yes.
So how can we hold this together? And I think it's open for discussion how we create this. All what we want to say with transrational is not to throw out the rational because we need it too.
Right. No, we certainly don't want to throw it out. I'm not sure we're going to necessarily combine them except by having both. You know, I'm not sure that they aren't two aspects of the human.
Yes.
I mean, maybe, but there are two aspects of being human that both need to be developed. And certainly in the West, the intuitional aspect needs to be more developed at this point.
Sure. I think, I mean, it's interesting because I think that one way to think about it, and something that we've talked about a lot, Thomas and I, is that in the course of developing this rationality and this individuated self-sense that we have put so much, or that actually is what creates what the West is this that we're individuals, that we're rational. No, we're not. But that this individuated rationality is that in the process of that, and this seems to be in many ways part of how mental development works, cognitive development works, is that in the process we have dissociated or cut off from other ways of knowing. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, with the technical and through that cut-offness, and with the technical power that it gave, we committed an enormous amount of particularly when it was crudely developed, we committed an enormous amount of violence with that because of the lack of contact, really. And there was some other point that I want to make that I just dropped, but that in that where we are now, like with someone like yourself, Denise, you are open to the intuitive. You are able to expand your own consciousness to kind of, participate in that in a different way. But you're not participating it in a way that someone who was pre-rational, let's say, did, or people that have not developed this kind of consciousness. You're not doing it that way. You're doing it. You're able to be an individuated self and reach for this. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a potential, and this is a potential, and where we're going, I think, is with the capacity to be individually who we are, self-reflective on our motives, on what makes us tick, and also be able to begin to open to these other dimensions of life, mm-hmm. that other cultures hold much more powerfully.
Yeah.
And I think that they're doing something, other cultures are doing something very similar, which I think is quite, what could come of this is very exciting.
Yeah. No, that's really true, and it is very exciting. I guess in my experience, I have no wish to lose my rationality and my intellectual, but I find that developing intuition, part of it requires letting go of the rational to some extent. I mean, that's why I see them as being more parallel streams, and where I actually have to let go of part of that development. Not let go of it, like I can come back to it. I can turn off that part of the brain, turn on the other. So I'm not letting go of it, but I am letting go of it in that context when I am in a situation that requires a more intuitive, intersubjective, relational situation, letting go of what makes sense and what's logical and what sounds strange and what isn't necessarily human. I have to let go of some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's interesting. Atelier Day has said, has raised the question, suspend the rational willingly for a while. And I was just going to say that there's a choice involved, and the capacity to have choice, to be able to choose to do that is actually an aspect of rationality itself. But starts to become trans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we also have to know when not to suspend the rational.
Of course.
And that's
right.
very
Driving
important.
the car. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Great. Any other question? Question, comment? There's some comments happening on the chat. You're welcome to join the conversation. Yes.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Thomas. Hello, everyone.
Great to see you.
Good to be here with you all. Just a comment and also a question related to what Denise was discussing. I'm here in New York and have a clinical practice here, and there's very much the reality that a lot of people are suffering because of their isolation and a lack of connection. Mm. And particularly, I see a lot of patients with chronic disease, and so there's a whole wealth of literature talking about chronic disease and how people can kind of get stuck in this identification with their illness, which really is also a kind of separation. Mm-hmm. And yet, asking patients to suspend the rational for a little while is very tricky. People really, it brings up a lot of fear. Maybe that's particular to New York, but there's this, oh my gosh, if I drop my rational intellectual, Thomas, you were saying in the beginning, this, or maybe it was Elizabeth, this kind of inquiry that chops down concepts. It's challenging. It's challenging because of the fear that arises, and so I would just like to bring that in and maybe ask a bit about that, how to work with that, how to hold that also.
I think our capacity to hold on to our rationality, on one hand, is a big achievement. There's a fear to lose our rational mind, that there's a reason for this, and it's well grounded. But at the same time, we can see that our fixation on this creates its own difficulties and our own separation from life. Because, as Elizabeth just said before, in order to develop our capacity to really see the world in a very rational, systemic way, we separated ourselves from deep capacities of human consciousness. Just the process of individuation, if one looks closely, individuation only works through separation. I can only individuate if I separate myself from the whole. Otherwise, I never become an individual. So on one hand, it is not possible to be an individual without the capacity to separate oneself from the whole. So how can we find a way to hold both on the cultural sense, and to see that many cultures, in that sense, particularly indigenous cultures, who have not individuated in the same way, hold the capacity where they are one with each other and one with nature, where we have a lot to learn from. And how can we learn from each other, from these different global places where we are as a human culture, so that both is possible? because there's something very powerful and important in our individuation process. But there's something very powerful in the deep realization that we don't have to separate. And I think that the global situation that we are here right now is very much how can we hold this the complexity of the human experience and learn from all parts of human culture in a way that holds this complexity. And I'm just stating basically what we're in the process of doing, talking as a culture. And I think it's up to all of us to really find a way how to hold this, but just to see both is important. And we see particularly in our highly individual cultures, and I'm sure New York is one of the examples on the globe that this is most the case, because New York stands for this. We have to see how our individuation creates a fear of being alive and being together. And I think we have to learn a lot from other parts of the globe where togetherness is much more a natural sense of being. And in that sense, also develop a humility and see how our process of Western culture created a form of alienation that we also have to face, because it not only created fear and anxiety for us, it created a lot of damage and destruction in the world.
And I would also add that what we're speaking about are not general instructions. That we're speaking to you and to others who have said, I am interested in going beyond this. And I think that I'm sure people come to you with their pain and with the issues that they're facing, and in some ways they're saying, help me go beyond this. But I think it's important to be in a context where you have a contract, in a certain sense, where you're all in agreement that this is the edge we want to push. And yeah, because it is a big deal. As you said, you can become very frightened. But it's that there's an agreement amongst us that we want to find a way forward, and from our differences, and from the fact that we're all one, and that creates a context where we can begin to explore these things and work at this edge as a new way of being. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? We've got let's see. I'm going to look a little bit at what we have here on our chat. Okay. Okay. Anybody who's chatting? Okay. Whatever. Actually, Julie asked a question about seeing globalization as a poison medicine, which is interesting. I think perhaps the way it has been happening now, it may be, or what we would call Euro-American, modernity as the force of globalization. That may be the case, and I think that our capacity to come together, that as you said, our Zoom technology makes possible, is actually very powerful. It creates something, a possibility for something new, and we don't know how that works, but by kind of creating the antidote to the kinds of alienation that Thomas was just speaking about, and the dynamics of domination and subordination that have been so much a part of this last period of globalization. These kinds of things give us clues as to where we don't want to go, and we don't, and then let's see what is possible. But I think we've actually come to the end of our time, and I'm thinking maybe if everyone could open your cameras, again at the lower left part of, you with that? The lower left part of your screen, and then we can all say hello, goodbye, and those of you who
You're also muted right now.
Hi.
Look, you got a whole club over there. Hey, Aneta. Aneta and Joya. Is that Vincent's? Hey, Blaze. Nice to meet you. Great.
You can see everyone.
Oh, some Karen says she's unable to open her video. Okay. Oh, good. Atrie. Good.
You've got to start. You've got to open my camera.
Yeah, you live.
Angela, where are you?
I'm right here. I can't open my video.
Okay.
Yeah, I can open mine.
Yeah, but gratitude and love to all.
Okay, yes.
Yeah,
Much
thank you,
love
Sister Thomas. It was really enlightening and wonderful.
Could you also open my video? You have closed it.
Oh, let's see. Close your video. Yeah, there are 28 of us. There are 28 lines open. So there are more than we've got here. Okay.
Open Carol.
Open Carol. Okay. Ask to start video.
You have closed it.
From Maria and Manon.
Yeah, my video is closed as well, Elizabeth.
Aha. Did you get it?
Start my video.
Oh, there you guys are. Okay.
There you go. Wait.
Did you open my video?
Yeah, we are trying to figure this out here.
Cecil, great to see you.
Hello.
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 Great to see you.
There you are.
Angelo, okay.
Yes.
That's more like it.
Good morning from New York.
Oh,
Great. Is that everybody?
No, my video's still closed. Yeah.
My videos also.
Oh, you open. Okay.
Mine also, Maria. It's also.
all right. It's all you.
We're looking to see if we can turn them on. We don't have one switch. We have to do it with each of their Maria.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Karen is saying that her video and volume doesn't work.
Doesn't work, right?
Okay.
Maria's alcohol?
Oh, there. Hi,
There
Karen.
she is. Hey, Karen.
Oh, great.
Hi, everyone.
I think is everybody? Everybody
so.
on? Oops, no. Julie.
I'm on the phone. Oh, what about Julie?
Yep.
Julie, you're gonna make everybody.
Hey.
Let's think all we can open.
I love it.
All right. Okay, bye-bye.
Great.
Those of you who still want to do, one second. Those of you who still need to do introductions, come back in 5 minutes and we'll do them. And otherwise, goodbye.
Until next time.
Great.
Sunday.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Thank you, Elizabeth and Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Fast done.
So für ihn ist es jetzt 3 Uhr morgens oder so, gell?